My name is Gianna. I'm 36 years old, living in a quiet coastal town in Oregon. That night, I stood frozen in the ICU room, clutching the hand of my 7-year-old daughter, Ava, as the heart monitor let out its warning tone. That tiny girl had just turned 7, had bravely survived 3 heart surgeries, and now lay motionless under a thin blanket, bathed in pale fluorescent light. My phone vibrated. A text from my mother-in-law: "Don't be dramatic. Let the child go. She never should have existed." 1 minute later, the monitor went silent in a single long tone. I didn't scream. I simply pulled out my second phone from my coat pocket, hit a button, and said, "Activate everything. Start now." Have you ever stayed silent just to strike back in a way no one saw coming? If this story makes your chest tighten, leave a comment. Hit like if you've ever been erased from your own life by those around you. And don't forget to subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is how I took everything back, not with anger, but with cold precision. I was born and raised in the outskirts of Green Bay, Wisconsin, in an old wooden house next to my father's auto repair shop. My mom died of pancreatic cancer when I was 12, and my dad spent his life working with calloused hands so I could get a proper education. We weren't rich, but I never felt poor. I studied hard, got into nursing school, and became an ER nurse at a small hospital near home. I met Ryan on a freezing February night, when snow piled so high that our ambulance had to stop halfway and transfer him by stretcher. He'd been in a snowmobile accident, broken femur, spinal trauma, multiple soft tissue injuries. But what I remember most isn't the monitors or the blood soaking through my scrubs. It was Ryan's eyes. Gray-blue, silent, watching the world like it was a puzzle, and landing right on me. He was my patient for 4 weeks. Not the toughest case I'd ever had, but the first to ask me, genuinely, about my childhood, about my mom, about dreams I'd once had as a little girl. And somehow, those conversations turned into shared lunches, then late-night calls, then an invitation to spend Christmas with his family in Seattle. The Mitchell family overwhelmed me. Lakeside mansion, 2 SUVs lined up like a magazine spread, dinner table set with 6 different kinds of silverware. His mother, Carolyn, descended the grand staircase smiling like she was entering a stage play. She said all the right things, complimented my caring eyes and gentle nurse's grace. I believed her warmth. I truly did. We married after 2 years of dating. It wasn't a grand wedding, but full of close friends. Ryan was still in recovery but had returned to work as a project manager for his family's private hospital chain. I moved with him to Washington, leaving behind the ER to work in post-op care. Everything seemed fine until I got pregnant with Ava. Ryan was surprised at first, but he held me tight and whispered, "Maybe we're ready." A few weeks later, we flew to Seattle to tell the family. Carolyn listened, then pressed her lips together and nodded slightly at her husband. I didn't think much of it. Not until after dinner, when she pulled me out onto the patio holding a glass of red wine and asked, "Are you planning to raise this child the same sink-or-swim way your mother raised you?" My heart skipped. But I forced a smile, thinking maybe she just lacked tact. I always tried to see the good in her, because she was the mother of the man I loved. Ava arrived 6 weeks early. The delivery was complicated. I lost a lot of blood, and the baby was rushed to pediatric cardiac care after they discovered a congenital valve defect. I didn't even get to hold her before she was placed in an incubator on a ventilator. I lay in my hospital bed alone, aching, and Ryan wasn't there. He said he had an urgent executive meeting. His mother showed up instead, standing at the foot of my bed, eyes icy. "We don't blame you," Carolyn said. "It's just, some bloodlines don't mix well." I turned my face to the wall. After that, I began documenting everything. Not because I knew how far this would go, but because, as a nurse, I was trained to spot symptoms before they became illness. And what I sensed in Carolyn's stare, in Ryan's distance, in the fact that I was the one handling all medical bills, those were symptoms. I created a folder on my hard drive called June 11th, the day Ava was born. I saved every bill, every clinic receipt, every photo of her charts, every message from Ryan saying, "I'm busy," when I sent him videos of her learning to sit. I noted down Carolyn's loaded remarks, every family gathering where I was treated like background help. I even started recording family meetings, especially the ones where I was excused so the adults could talk business. Ryan was no longer the man I'd once seen under the ambulance lights. He began referring to Ava as it, not our daughter. He moved into his home office, said I needed rest, needed to focus on Ava. But I saw his phone logs. Unknown numbers. Deleted messages. When I asked, he replied, "You're being too emotional." I learned to stay quiet, not from fear but because I needed time to see clearly. Ava grew up around doctors, medications, a heart rhythm monitor. But she always smiled when I brushed her hair, always waved and called, "Mommy," when I walked in. Every little gesture reminded me I still mattered, to her at least. Every night after she slept, I sat by our apartment window, hospital receipts scattered in street lamp glow. I knew I wasn't that carefree nurse anymore. I was a mother. And if silence meant keeping her safe, I would do it. But I also knew, one day, that silence would become the sharpest weapon I'd ever wield. A week before Ava was rehospitalized, Carolyn called. She invited me to a family evening, said it was to uplift everyone's spirits. Her voice was soft as silk, every word measured like she'd practiced it in a mirror. I hesitated, but I agreed. Not because I believed her, but because I needed to see what role they'd prepared for me. That evening, it drizzled lightly, just enough to fog up the windows as I drove the winding road to the Mitchell estate. The house looked like a magazine photo. Warm lights, white picket fence, late-season roses blooming around the porch. Ava wasn't with me. She had a mild fever after adjusting her medication, and I didn't trust anyone else to care for her besides the nurse I'd personally hired. I stepped inside, my dark dress still damp at the hem. The dining room was immaculate. Embroidered linens, crystal glasses placed according to wine type. But the first thing I noticed wasn't the elegance. It was the round table with 8 chairs. All had name cards. None for Ava. Not a single detail suggested she even existed in this evening. I walked closer, keeping my voice even. "I thought tonight was about supporting Ava?" Carolyn smiled. "Exactly why we kept it light. No need for the child to feel the weight of tension, right?" I gripped my purse tighter, lips pressed. I was used to her polite venom by now. Dinner began with lobster bisque, then moved to ribs in a special sauce I knew no one in this house had cooked themselves. Ryan sat across from me, tie straight, shirt crisp, eyes never once meeting mine. No questions about Ava. No questions about me. Between the main course and dessert, Carolyn gently placed a cream-colored envelope on the table, sliding it toward me. She still smiled, graceful, like offering a wedding invitation. "I believe it's time to be honest," she said, her eyes now utterly transparent. I opened the envelope. Inside was a printed bill from St. Clarity Hospital, where Ava was being treated. Some sections were highlighted. The total amount due, over $42,000. "We've covered most of the expenses," Carolyn said, her voice like she was reading quarterly returns. "But going forward, it's going to be difficult to maintain." I looked up calmly. "What do you mean?" "Gianna, I think we should consider what's best for Ava. With our family's resources, connections, and medical access, we can ensure optimal care." "How exactly?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She slowly pulled a navy blue folder from her handbag. I opened it and felt my heart plummet. On the first page, transfer of medical and legal guardianship, Ava Mitchell. Recipient, Carolyn Mitchell. Signed by Ryan Mitchell. Date of signature, 3 days ago. I don't remember how long it took me to breathe again. My eyes scanned my husband's signature, right beneath the line. Consent for temporary transfer of medical and custodial authority. My name wasn't there. There wasn't a single space for my approval. I looked up, my eyes locking with Ryan's. "When did you sign this?" He didn't answer. Just stared down at the creme brulee in front of him like it had suddenly become the most fascinating thing on earth. "Ryan?" I asked again. He shrugged lightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're just trying to help. I thought, if there's an emergency, Mom could react faster." "Without my consent?" I asked, my tone low but firm as stone. Carolyn chimed in, gently patting my hand like she was soothing a pouting child. "Sometimes, Gianna, being a good mother means stepping back. Letting someone more experienced take over." I pulled my hand away from hers, stood up, the chair scraping a sharp screech across the polished wood floor. The room fell silent. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. As I walked out of the estate, I passed a hallway lined with family photos. Ryan at his college graduation. Carolyn and her husband on a cruise in Greece. Not one picture of Ava. Not a single frame with me. I opened my car door and sat in the driver's seat, my hands still shaking. The rain had grown heavier. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, feeling like I'd just been erased from a book I was never truly written into. I glanced down at the folder again. My fingertips brushed Ryan's cold, impersonal signature. And at that moment I didn't feel pain anymore. Just clarity. They had planned this. Me. I had stayed silent for too long. I returned to the hospital early the next morning, before the sun had even broken through the thick ICU windows. Ava was still there, thinner than I remembered, her hair tangled, a breathing mask covering her tiny face. I sat beside her bed, holding her icy little finger, when a young nurse entered with a hesitant look. "I'm sorry, Gianna," she said quietly. "I need to reconfirm some file details. Mrs. Carolyn Mitchell came by earlier and said you're no longer the primary medical guardian, so?" I looked up, my whole body tightening. "What did you just say?" She presented documents signed by Mr. Ryan Mitchell, requesting a record update, noting that the biological mother no longer holds full legal authority. "You're just the caregiver." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, like she didn't believe it herself. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just nodded and said, "I understand. Thank you." Then I walked out of Ava's room and straight to the administrative office at the end of the hall. There, I requested to review the most recent file updates. The woman at the front desk looked confused when I presented my medical ID and stated I was the legal mother. She made a call, then led me to a small glass-walled room. Inside, a thick folder was already waiting on the table. I flipped through the pages. The guardian's name had been changed, from Gianna Mitchell to Carolyn Mitchell. The date of signature was less than 24 hours ago. At the bottom was the signature of the attending night physician. Dr. Thomas Greer. I stopped breathing for a beat. Thomas. I knew him. He'd been Ryan's college roommate for 4 years. He'd also stood as a groomsman at our wedding. I tapped the desk lightly and asked the receptionist, "Is he on shift right now?" She nodded. "Third floor, cardiac emergency unit." I walked out, headed straight for the elevator, and rode up to the third floor. The hallway was quiet, a soft overhead voice announcing routine blood pressure checks. I spotted Thomas from a distance. White coat, name badge crooked, head down, signing something on a clipboard. I approached him without a word. When he looked up and saw me, his face froze. For a moment. Then another. He turned away immediately, pretending to rearrange papers. "Thomas," I said, my voice calm like I was asking for a pen. "Did you sign off on Carolyn Mitchell becoming Ava's guardian?" He was silent for a while, then replied without meeting my eyes. "I just signed the forms the family provided." I didn't know the full situation. I stared at him. "You know I'm Ava's mother. You held her in your arms at her first birthday party. You remember that, don't you?" He pressed his lips together, still avoiding my gaze. I pulled out my phone, silently switched on the no audio video record, pretending to adjust my bag. "I need a copy of every document you signed in the past 72 hours related to the custody transfer. And I suggest you keep the originals for your attorney." I turned and walked away. But I didn't go back to the ICU. I headed straight to the parking garage, slid into the driver's seat, and opened the file drawer beneath. I pulled out an old business card, the silver edges worn down by time. Angela Whitmore, family attorney. The only woman who had once looked me in the eye and said if I didn't act soon, they'd erase me from Ava's life without even saying sorry. I called. One ring. "Gianna." Angela's voice was low, clear, and utterly steady. "I need you. Right now. Grand Ridge Hospital, 6th floor ICU." Angela paused for a second. "They've started, haven't they?" "Step by step," I said. "And I'm not letting them take the next one. Send me the hospital name, room number, and any documents you have. I'll be there in 45 minutes. I hung up, feeling slightly lighter. Not because I felt safe, but because I knew from this moment on I wasn't alone. What they had just done wasn't just wrong. It was illegal. It was collusion. I reopened my phone, accessed my private backup folder, and downloaded every file I had. Ava's birth certificate, initial medical documentation, previous guardianship papers signed by me. I sent them all to Angela. And when the screen showed files successfully sent, I finally realized my hands were still trembling. But not from fear. From the look of real panic I had seen in Thomas's eyes. Because I knew once people who think they hold all the power start to fear you, that means you're on the right path. That night, once Ava's nurse had changed shifts and Angela was still working with the hospital's legal team, I returned to the small rental apartment near Grand Ridge. The living room lights were still set to soft yellow. The wall clock ticked lazily. And I sat motionless at the desk, Ryan's old iPad placed in front of me. That iPad used to be shared, used to track Ava's vaccine schedule, read bedtime stories, sometimes even browse wedding photos. But at some point Ryan started using it for work. I thought he had changed the password. But when I powered it on, the screen still displayed my profile name, Gianna's family profile. The password was Ava's birthday, the one thing it seemed he hadn't erased. I didn't know exactly what made me search through it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the emptiness of being erased from my own child's life. I opened the default messaging app. Nothing there. But in the old group chat folder, one name showed up faintly, Contain Her. A hidden group not on the main list, only visible in search history. I opened it. The first message was from 3 months ago. The initiator was Bryce Mitchell, Ryan's younger brother, formerly in the finance department at Mitchell Medical Group. The message read, "She's becoming unmanageable. If we don't control the narrative now, she'll take legal action." The next reply came from Carolyn. "Get Emily in. She knows how to neutralize without mess." Emily. I didn't know anyone named Emily in the family. I kept scrolling. And then I saw it. Consultant Emily. The profile picture was a gold-plated logo of a PR firm, and the account name read, Emily B. Langford. I kept reading. Every message. Every plan. Stage concern. Suggest psychiatric evaluation. Tie it to postpartum episode, she mentioned it in the past. Already drafted psychological review request. We only need Thomas to flag behavioral instability. We'll need medical jargon in the document. Enough to raise doubt in case she fights custody. I froze, my hands icy cold. They weren't just trying to remove me as guardian. They were building a narrative that I was unstable, out of control, potentially dangerous to Ava. And the worst part, they had chosen the exact weak point. My postpartum depression records from the time of Ava's birth. Records that were supposed to be protected under HIPAA. I screenshotted the entire chat thread, backed it up to the secure vault on my phone, and sent an encrypted copy to Angela. 15 minutes later my phone rang. Gianna. Angela's voice was tight as a wire. Listen carefully. Emily Langford is the director of strategic communications for a crisis management firm, a company hired by wealthy families when there's an internal scandal or looming legal fallout. I went completely still. She handled the Hollingsworth divorce, fabricated a personality disorder claim against the ex-wife to secure inheritance for the husband. Angela paused. And now she's working for them. I heard the tapping of fingers on a desk on her end. But this time, Angela said, we have something they didn't count on, insider evidence. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. They're using my medical history as a legal weapon, I said slowly. They want my child to believe her mother is a threat. Angela's voice dropped into a vow. We're not going to let that happen. I sat in silence for a long while. In my head, a loop kept playing. Carolyn signing hospital forms in my place, Thomas averting his gaze, Ryan sitting still like none of this involved him. I pulled up the screen again and looked at the last message from Emily. Sent at 2 a.m. Just 3 words. Wait. She'll fold. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened the only remaining note saved on the iPad and typed 3 words of my own. I didn't send it. No one needed to see it. She never will. The next morning I wore a high-collared white blouse, buttoned all the way up like it was the last piece of armor I had left. Angela met me outside the county courthouse, holding a thick file bag, eyes sharp and voice steady. The sky was gray, no rain, but the wind was sharp enough to cut through even the memories I had tried to bury. We won't make noise, Angela said as we climbed the courthouse steps. We just need to be clear, documented, and unwavering. I nodded, clutching the small black notebook. The one where I had written every journal entry during my nights at Ava's bedside, every medication timestamp, every fever-induced whisper she muttered while half awake. I didn't need to prove I was her mother. I just needed to prove I had never disappeared. In the courtroom, Carolyn and Ryan were already seated. Both wore navy suits, neat and composed, their demeanor so polished it was nearly icy. Carolyn looked me up and down, her expression completely devoid of feeling. Ryan turned away as I entered, like I was a flawed draft he wished he could erase from the story of his life. The judge was a middle-aged man with silver-streaked hair and glasses resting low on his nose. He opened the case file without a handshake or greeting, flipping through the pages with rhythmic precision. Angela began. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was clear. Your Honor, my client is Gianna Mitchell, the biological mother, legal guardian, and primary caregiver of Ava Mitchell since the day of her birth. We are submitting supporting documents including the birth certificate, full medical history from Grand Ridge Hospital, intake forms, and all legally authorized medical consents signed throughout each course of treatment. She placed 3 thick binders on the table, each labeled with color-coded tabs. Legal documents, behavioral interference, and evidence of defamation attempt. My client also submits group chat transcripts from a conversation titled, Contain Her, which show the opposing party knowingly collaborated with a crisis communications expert to fabricate a false psychiatric profile for the purpose of stripping her legal custody, without any formal clinical evaluation or medical board review. The room went silent. Ryan's lawyer, a tall, neat brunette, immediately stood up to object. We challenge the authenticity of these transcripts. Furthermore, the plaintiffs have the right to express concern over Ms. Mitchell's mental fitness, based on her documented postpartum depression in 2016 from a local clinic. Angela didn't flinch, didn't blink. And that file has never been legally used to question her custodial rights. My client has never missed a single treatment of her daughter, has never been found unfit by any certified healthcare professional appointed within the medical system. The judge looked down at the file. He opened a page and tapped his pen lightly on the annotation section. I have here a copy of Ms. Gianna's work schedule at Grand Ridge Hospital, confirming her continuous presence from the 2nd to the 18th of this month, including overnight shifts. There's also a signed statement from 3 nurses verifying that she personally provided care for Ava. He looked up. Carolyn Mitchell. Do you have any documents showing that you are the legal guardian or that you've ever been responsible for direct medical care for the child? Carolyn remained composed, but her lips tightened. I'm the child's grandmother. Our family has a long-standing tradition in medicine. We only want what's best for Ava. Angela didn't wait for the judge's question. We don't question the family's love. But stripping a mother's rights based on emotion, deliberate defamation, and colluding with a PR firm to erase her from legal records is both unethical and unlawful. Carolyn now stared directly at me, her gaze sharp as a blade. You think a few sheets of paper make you a mother? I looked back, unflinching. No. But it means I'm no longer invisible. Finally. A hush settled over the courtroom. The judge tapped his pen on the desk. Emergency motion to transfer guardianship to Carolyn Mitchell is denied. There is no legal basis to question the capability of Gianna Mitchell. The file is temporarily preserved, and any further intervention will be considered under court supervision. Ryan bowed his head, hands clenched on his knees. Carolyn sat tall, but her eyes squinted as if tasting something bitter in her mouth. I didn't smile. Didn't sigh in relief. I simply stepped back toward Angela. Because I knew this wasn't the end. But I was no longer erased from my own story. And even if they kept trying to silence me in every way, today I spoke in the language of truth, law, and resilience. 3 days after the hearing, the articles began to appear. Not in major newspapers, no clear authorship. But they spread across local parent groups, forums for families with hospitalized children, and even large social media pages. Headlines like, Overwhelmed Mom, the story behind a girl's hospital bed at Grand Ridge, and Guardianship Warnings, when emotion clouds judgment. They didn't name me. But anyone following the case could clearly tell who was being targeted. The articles quoted a source close to the family, referenced uncontrolled history of depression, and hinted that in 2016 she was once hospitalized in a mentally unstable postpartum state. I read every word. Didn't skip a line. Didn't cry. Didn't tremble. I just felt cold. Not because they twisted the truth, I was used to that, but because they were laying the groundwork for a deeper, crueler attack. Angela called the moment the first article dropped. Her voice was low and brisk. Media strategy. They hired professionals. I looked into it. It's Langford Strategic, Emily's firm. I leaned back in my chair. Who does she work for? For people with money who want to erase someone without leaving fingerprints. But this time, Angela said slowly, they're trying to prove you're legally incompetent. Step 1 is convincing the court to order a mandatory psychological evaluation. I nodded. I'm ready. Angela paused. The person who'll be evaluating you is Dr. Alice Moreland. Appointed by the court. Private session. I frowned. That name sounds familiar. Angela replied softly, I thought so too. Until I saw the original record. Looks like she was once a patient at ICU. Lucence. I froze. Lucence. Back when I was still head nurse in the ER. There was an admission at 3 a.m., a 63-year-old woman with high blood pressure and arrhythmia, arrived alone with no family. I remembered her clearly. After the medication drip, she held my hand and said, I didn't think anyone still saw me as a real person. The appointment took place Wednesday morning at a therapy office about a 10-minute walk from the hospital. I arrived 15 minutes early, waited in a small room with green carpet, soft yellow lighting, and a faint peppermint scent in the air. The door opened right on time. A slender woman with silver hair, sharp eyes that weren't cold, stepped out. She looked at me for a moment. I stood. Gianna. I nodded. Hello, doctor. She tilted her head, studying me. We've met. Lucence. Winter night. I smiled gently, unable to hide my emotion. You had a blood pressure drop after walking home alone. I gave you 2 dopamine drips. She nodded. You remember better than my cardiologist. We entered the room. No questionnaire, no recorder. Just 2 wooden chairs and a small tea table with a tray holding 3 types of tea: peppermint, chamomile, and classic black. I'm not here to assess you like a defendant, she said, but to listen and see what's worth protecting on your side. I looked at her, then spoke. I didn't hide anything. The postpartum depression that made me feel like I'd vanished from my own body. The nights I sat beside Ava's crib, afraid to pick her up for fear I might suffocate her. The first time I let her grasp my finger and realized she was alive. Not because of someone else, but because I didn't leave. I spoke about Carolyn. About Ryan. About altered records, erased words, and the silence they painted over me like whitewash, hoping I'd disappear. She never interrupted. Just rested her hands on her lap and nodded when I stopped. Finally, she asked, if they removed you from Ava's life, what would you do? I didn't take long. I'd rebuild everything. From nothing. But Ava will always know her mother was there, not out of duty but by choice. She stood. Walked to a bookshelf, pulled out a leather-bound notebook, opened it and wrote a few lines. Then turned back to me, her gaze no longer questioning. There are scars you can see, she said softly. And scars that only exist to prove you fought. I didn't answer. I just looked at her, and in that moment I knew I didn't have to prove anything anymore. Not to her. And soon not to anyone. I moved into my new apartment on a rainy Saturday morning. The place was just under 700 square feet, on the second floor of an old building a few blocks from the beach. The front window faced a misty stretch of white sand, and at dawn, ocean breeze swept down the long hallway, carrying the soft scent of salt and the soothing sound of waves like a whispered comfort. I didn't choose this place for its amenities. I chose it for its quiet, because no one here knew my name, and because it was far enough from the hospital that I could finally call it home without stepping out of anxiety's shadow. Ava's bedroom was the smallest of the 3. The window looked out over a moss-covered rooftop, where seabirds sometimes landed in the morning. I let her choose the paint color. She had been sitting on the hospital bed that day, holding the printed swatch the nurse had brought in, her lips pressed together as if she were deciding something bigger than any round of treatment. This one, Mommy, she said, pointing at a soft yellow square labeled Helenium Bloom. Why? I asked. Ava answered in a voice as gentle as the breeze. It looks like the light in your throat when you sing me to sleep. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. 3 days later, I began rolling the first layer of paint across the wall. The yellow spread like raw honey, glowing in the rare afternoon light that slipped through the window. I did it alone. Didn't call a painter. Didn't play music. I let the quiet rhythm of the paintbrush blend with the sound of my heartbeat, steady and clear. As I unpacked the cardboard boxes from our old apartment, I found a stack of drawings hastily tucked into one of Ava's canvas bags. I unfolded each sheet. Most were innocent little scribbles. Three-legged cats, tilted rainbows, sunflowers with smiling faces. But one made me sit down on the floor and go completely still. It was drawn in black pencil. The lines were shaky, no colors. An adult and a child stood side by side under a large tree. The adult had long hair and held the child's hand. In the bottom left corner, written in uneven block letters, "Mommy and me." I don't remember when the tears began. Maybe it was when I saw how she'd drawn the mother's eyes looking directly at the child, not turning away, not walking off. Or maybe it was when I realized that no matter the files, the paperwork, or what they tried to erase, Ava still remembered me in a way no one could ever alter. I found an old wooden frame, cleaned it, and slipped the drawing inside. No border, no plastic seal. Just left it as it was, like a child's hand resting gently over a mother's heart. I placed it right on my desk by the window next to the court documents, legal files, and copies of all the evidence Angela had been collecting. Among all the cold text, it was the only thing alive. A quiet reminder. I wasn't fighting for a win. I was fighting so that one day my daughter wouldn't have to remember, because she'd be living what she believed was true. That night I took a photo of the desk. The drawing, the files, the last light of day slanting across the wood. I sent the picture to Angela with no message, just a subject line. "I'm still here." Angela called me back within 3 minutes. Her voice was slightly hoarse from wrapping up another hearing. "It's beautiful," she said. "Not the drawing. The way she drew you. Like a tree." I smiled faintly but said nothing. "We'll use it," she continued, her voice softening, "as part of the witness file. Not traditional legal evidence, but enough to show the court Ava senses who hasn't left her." I listened, eyes fixed on the ocean outside. The waves kept rolling in, and the lighthouse beams swept across the water like a mother's arms watching from afar. I rested my fingers on the glass of the frame. The pencil had smudged a little on the shoulder of the mother figure. I touched it gently, like brushing against a memory that hadn't yet faded. Out there they were still drafting strategies, hiring lawyers, planting rumors. But in this little room I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. And my daughter, with a stubby old pencil and a fearless heart, had drawn me the only map I'd ever need to stay on course. The courtroom that day was especially silent, so still the judge's pen tapping against the wooden bench sounded like a hammer strike. No one moved when I stepped forward, a USB drive tucked into my coat pocket. Angela wasn't next to me. She told me to stand alone. Not because she didn't want to defend me, but because she believed my voice was strong enough not to need anyone else. "Your Honor," I said, steady and low, "I respectfully submit an audio file." It was legally recorded at Grand Ridge Hospital in a public area, where the speaker voluntarily made these statements to medical personnel. The judge nodded. I placed the USB on the table. The court clerk plugged it in. The screen lit up and the audio line appeared. I didn't look at Ryan. I didn't look at Carolyn. I focused only on the first few seconds where her voice came through, cold and measured. "Let the child die. Weakness like that should be corrected by nature." A wave of shock rippled across the courtroom. The plaintiff's side had no rebuttal. Ryan bowed his head. Carolyn sat frozen, her hand clutching a cream-colored clutch bag. I stepped back, saying nothing more. I didn't need to. The truth was standing tall on its own now. The judge looked down at the file before him, then back at Ryan's legal team. He was about to speak when a chair behind me scraped loudly across the floor. Someone stood up. "Bryce." I turned. He had never spoken during any of the previous hearings. Always a quiet observer, his role vague within the Mitchell family. But now his eyes blazed, like a door had just been flung wide open from the inside. "Your Honor," Bryce said, voice tight with emotion, "may I speak as a private individual?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "You are the younger brother of the defendant Ryan Mitchell?" "Yes." "Then I've stayed silent for far too long. Bryce took a deep breath. His hands trembled as he pulled a second USB drive from his suit pocket, sealed in a plastic pouch. I was once asked by my mother and brother to cooperate in spreading false information about Gianna. They told me to say she had hit Ava during a depressive episode, that she had left the child alone in a locked car for hours. None of it was true. The room was dead silent. Bryce swallowed hard, eyes locked on the judge. I recorded a full meeting between my mother, my brother, and a woman named Emily Langford. In it, they discussed creating a fake psychological profile to strip Gianna of guardianship. They even talked about modifying Ava's death record in the event she didn't make it. Angela stood, walking up to take the USB from Bryce's hand. No one stopped her. Not even Ryan's lawyer could meet the judge's eyes. Again the audio played. It was Ryan's voice, chillingly clear. Once she's gone, we just need the paperwork. No mother on file, no claim. Clean exit. And if she tries to fight? Carolyn's voice. We leak the psych file. She folds. She always folds. The judge leaned back in his chair. He removed his glasses, set them down, and quietly folded his hands. Full and unrestricted custody of Ava Mitchell is hereby restored to Gianna Mitchell. The evidence clearly shows the plaintiffs attempted to manipulate legal records, fraudulently revoke rightful guardianship, and colluded with media agents. Ryan Mitchell is permanently stripped of all parental rights. He turned to Carolyn. Your actions will be referred to the district attorney's office for possible criminal investigation, including document tampering, falsifying medical records, and intentional emotional harm to the respondent. Carolyn didn't flinch. She stared straight ahead, her eyes no longer defiant. Something inside her had cracked. Bryce returned to his seat without another word. But as I walked past, he whispered, "I'm sorry. And thank you for not staying silent like I did." I nodded. Not to forgive. Not to blame. Just acknowledging a man who had once been trapped in the dark, now finding the way out. The room slowly emptied. Ryan was escorted out by court officers. Carolyn walked behind him, slowly, never looking back. Angela stood beside me, her hand gently resting on my shoulder, her eyes fixed on the closed file in front of us. I looked toward the judge's bench. I didn't see victory. I saw stillness. A stillness as deep as the ocean floor after the storm has passed. And I knew, no matter how many words they once used to deny me, today before the law and the very people who tried to erase me from my daughter's life, I stood, not as a victim but as someone irreplaceable. Ava woke up on a sunny morning. Light streamed through the hospital window, casting a soft glow across her white sheets and warm cheeks, like the world whispering good morning. I was right beside her, my head resting gently on the edge of the bed, my hand wrapped around her tiny fingers, just like I had done for weeks. There was a faint sound. A small movement. Then a whisper light as smoke. "Mommy." I shot upright, my heart forgetting to beat. Ava's eyes opened. Her pupils were still hazy, as if she had traveled from far away. But the moment she looked at me, something lit up inside them, a light no medicine could create. She moved her lips. And then, with a hoarse voice, she said, "Mommy, I saw you." I knew, you were still there. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The emotion didn't flow as tears. It spread like a soft curtain, covering the scars that had stretched across the past year. I just leaned down, rested my forehead against her small hand, and whispered, "I've always been here. Always." Ava didn't answer. She closed her eyes again, but her fingers gripped mine gently. As if that answer was enough. 1 year later, I stood in a room that wasn't cold like the ICU, nor dark like the courtroom. The walls were painted a soft ash gray. The floors were old wood but clean. A reception desk sat by a large window, where the late afternoon sun spilled onto the floor in warm, quiet streaks. A sign outside the door read, "Brave Roots Foundation. We're here so no mother stands alone." I opened our first office on the anniversary of the day Ava was taken off the ventilator. She's 8 now, healthy, attending part-time school and able to tie her own shoelaces. A milestone doctors had once told me not to get my hopes up for. My office is at the end of the hall. The only thing hanging behind my desk is a framed drawing, Ava's Mommy and Me. I didn't touch it. The pencil smudge on the shoulder, the crooked letters in the corner. Mommy and me still there. Beneath it, I taped a small handwritten note, drawn on the day she forgot pain but remembered who stayed. I started this foundation to help mothers who had been pushed out of their own place. Not with fists but with paperwork, lawyers, and polished insults wrapped in the ribbons of family name and tradition. We began with 3 consulting attorneys, a group of volunteer nurses to support postpartum mental health, a tech specialist to secure the personal data of women whose records had been weaponized against them. Our office is right on the ground floor of the old municipal building, the same place where I was once denied the right to sign Ava's guardianship papers, because her grandmother had already signed. I remember that day clearly. The wooden door slammed behind me. The intake clerk wouldn't meet my eyes. And I stood frozen, not because I was weak but because I knew any protest would be labeled emotional instability. Now that very room is where we process over 20 cases a month. Every woman who steps through that door is welcomed with the same words, "We believe you're still here." One March afternoon while I was organizing the bookshelf, Ava walked in. She wore a yellow floral dress and held a cup of orange juice like a self-appointed chief secretary. "Do you need more paperclips, Mommy?" she asked. I laughed. "I only need you." She placed the cup on my desk, then skipped over to the sofa by the wall, where a light knit blanket and a small embroidered pillow read "Still Standing." I heard the sound of crayons on pastel paper. A few minutes later she came over and held up a new drawing. "This is your office. That's you. And these are all the other mommies. I'm calling it Mommy and All the Brave Ones." I looked at the drawing, tiny figures holding hands standing close together with a rainbow arching overhead. In the center, a mother with long hair like mine stood tall, cradling a child in hospital pajamas covered in stars. I said nothing, just hugged Ava tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, sunlight, sweat, and a life still unfolding. They once tried to erase me from the paperwork. Erase me from her life with closed-door contracts, hospital hallway whispers, and the courteous silence of the well-connected. But my daughter never needed documents to know who was there, every night. Who sang lullabies over the beep of machines. Who held her hand when the pain came. No one wrote my name on her birth certificate. But she carved it into the world the day she called out for me after surgery. And I knew, at that moment, everything they had tried to use to erase me shattered. Not because I won, but because she remembered. And that alone is enough to say I exist. What do you think it means when a mother is erased from her child's life, just because she didn't fit her in-laws' expectations? Have you ever witnessed or experienced what it's like to be stripped of your role as a parent simply because you lacked money, status, or approved bloodlines? If this story reminds you of someone or something, don't hesitate to share your thoughts below. Sometimes your voice might be the light someone else needs while walking through darkness. Family isn't always the warm place we hope for. But I believe, with patience, love, and courage, we can rewrite what was once declared final. If this story touched something in your heart, hit that subscribe button and stay with us for more powerful, honest, and deeply human journeys about family, love, and the people who dared to stand for what's right. Because some stories aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be felt, remembered, and to remind us that true love never stays silent.